evening, everyone. I'm going to call this meeting to order of the City of Montpelier Development Review Board. My name is Daniel Richardson. I serve as chair for this meeting Monday, August 19th, 2019. We're beginning at 7 p.m. The other members to my right are
Kevin O'Connell,
Michael Lazorchak,
Meredith Crandall, staff.
Kate McCarthy.
Ryan Kane.
Okay, the first item of business is approval of the agenda. Does anybody have any changes to the agenda?
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion to approve the agenda for this evening's meeting.
Okay, motion by Kevin. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Ryan. All those in favor of approving the agenda as printed, please raise your right hand. We have an agenda. There are no comments from the chair this evening. And then we have the review of the July 22nd minutes. Myself, Kevin, Kate, Ryan, and Claire were in attendance. Have those who are eligible to vote had an opportunity to review the minutes?
Yes.
And do they have any changes?
Yes.
Okay.
I'd like to note a spelling correction in the 29 Franklin Street application. It's Mary Ann is listed as two, Mary Ann Pershuk is listed as two names, Mary and Ann. It's actually M-A-R-I-A-N-N-E, one word.
Okay. And so if we have that corrected,
Done. Thank you.
any other changes? With that, do I have a motion to approve the July 22nd minutes with the correction noted by Kate? Claire makes the motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Kevin. All those in favor who are eligible to vote, please raise your right hand. Our minutes are approved. And that brings us to the first item of business, which is 11 Baldwin Street, 11 Baldwin Ave, and that is the Vermont Natural Resources Council.
I'll be recusing myself from this review.
Okay, thank you, Kate. Brian? I do have a pen.
I think so.
I do have some materials to hand out and some revisions to the site plan.
Great. Why don't we just, do you want to hand those out now?
It's up to you.
Yeah,
that
that's
makes
perfectly
sense.
fine. Thank you. Thank you.
Yep.
Yes, the wrong thing. Okay. I've got two items. This is the site plan. And I'll explain what they are in just a second. I didn't realize I had this in this size.
Oh, awesome.
Great. Okay, if you state your name for the record, please.
I'm Brian Shoup. I'm the Executive Director of the Vermont Natural Resources Council.
Okay, and Brian, you were put under oath last time. Do you understand that you're still under oath
I do.
for the remainder of this testimony? Great. So when we talked last time, I think there were some decisions that needed to be made in regards to the parking. And I'll just start there because I think that was that was really the main issue that we were considering last time. Do you have any updates, which I
Yes.
presume
At
correspond to
the
the
prior
handout?
meeting, I had submitted a site plan that showed parking spaces along the driveway that were in front of the building line, which I didn't realize at the time could not count towards parking towards the total. So the board asked me to look at alternatives to reconfigure the parking. At that time, I had said that I had identified at least one additional space that could be located adjacent to the driveway that would not be in front of the building line. I also said that I could explore parking off of Terrace Street. So what this plan does is it shows 6 spaces, including 4 down in the current driveway area, one within an expanded driveway adjacent to the house, one in an expanded driveway behind the garage portion of the building, one which that open area next to the porch right in here, could be a designated handicap space if necessary, and then one in the garage. And then we also had initially provided a proposal for 3 spaces off of terrace. We ran into, then realized that the setback for the side yard was 5 feet, which that would have required pretty much maxing out our frontage on terrace, so we scaled that back to 2 parking spaces off of terrace. So that would be a total of 6 spaces. 5 were required, is my understanding. I did, and I apologize for handing this out at tonight's meeting, not getting it ahead of time. I've been on vacation and dealing with our engineer to get things done, so things did unfortunately come together at the last minute, so I appreciate your patience. And I know you have some questions about the Terrace Street parking, I would like the board to consider, I would request that the board consider granting us an exemption for 1 space because of the cost of the Terrace Street parking primarily, and I think there will be some discussion about stormwater and whatnot. At the last meeting, I passed out some materials that documented that our building is located within 1,000 feet of 2 transit stops, and I also made a commitment that the building would provide interior storage space for bicycles as well as indoor shower facilities for people to bike to work, which we do have some of our staff do that on a regular basis. We're also prepared to do a demand management program to provide incentives for folks who live in the Chittenden County area to take the bus. So parking is a real issue. We understand that. We understand on Terrace Street in particular, parking is a real problem during the legislative session. The rest of the year, it's actually fairly easy. Terrace Street usually fills up, but the street immediately across Bailey that runs up to those stone arches that go to the Redstone property, there's almost always parking available there during the non-legislative session months. So, we would be willing to make other accommodations, to have satellite parking at the Department of Labor building and take the shuttle in or walk. But if you're uncomfortable with that, if you don't feel as though we meet the waiver standards, we would go ahead with the Terrace Street parking.
When you say parking at the Department of Labor, is that, would that be in those public spaces that are?
Yeah, a lot of people park there and take the shuttle to the State House. It's pretty common.
Okay. Members of the board have any questions about this revised plan?
I have a question about the fence detail. Is that proposed to surround the Terrace Street parking area on 2 sides?
Yes.
And how would that be managed with removing snow?
We would have to dig it out, bucket load, and put it over the fence. That's one of my unfortunately kind of being at the last minute and not being able to talk to the engineer. What I'd prefer to do is have it be removable and be able just to shove it into the woods. But at this point, I'm expecting that we would need to shovel it. And another reason that we'd prefer a waiver under the waiver provision.
So your preference is to not have to do the Terrace Street at all?
Yes.
And it's
2
2 spots?
spots.
One of which is not required, is that my
Yes.
understanding? So there's 5 spaces are required to
Yes.
maximize the square footage for commercial usage.
Yes.
You've depicted 4 on the existing Baldwin Street side. And then if you're gonna do the Terrace Street parking, you'll have an additional parking
Additional
space up
parking.
there. Okay.
Well, looking at your design, is there a particular reason why you wouldn't have sort of that 5th spot in the sort of courtyard area, behind the building and behind the car space marked standard space?
Yes, in the initial plan, I had 2 parallel parking spaces there,
Right.
and I actually believe it can accommodate that. I'm going to be really honest with you. There's the dimensional requirements required under the zoning, and I understand those. And then there's human habits, and my
Right.
bet is we will be parking more cars occasionally than as we do at our office at 9 Baldwin.
Right.
Although I think we could configure that fifth space with, my concern, and I talked to Meredith today, was you can only stack so many cars.
You're under the regulations, they're only allowed to be able to tandem park two. You know, you can't have a row of three, a tandem.
Yeah, you can only obstruct one car.
You can only obstruct one car with one car,
Right.
so they could have a block of four, but you can't have three cars in a line. May I make I know this isn't what's on the application, but there is an allowance for the board to approve compact car spaces, and there's no definition of what a compact car size space must be. So just throwing that out there.
Well-
And this, because I was away until last night, initially, you could parallel park a car up against the porch. And that and the other car both cars would not be blocking the garage.
Right.
Is there a handicap parking requirement?
Yes, I think I said in the staff report they need at least one ADA accessible spot, and I think we would discuss that being the one up against the porch.
And I know that
potentially.
there was the question about where would handicap access be, and it would be most likely the wing of the building that juts out from the L of the porch. That's a sunroom. It would either be through there's a door that goes directly out, which is the best at grade. We had thought about being in what would be the main door into the building. It's not clear now whether or not the interior door openings would allow for handicapped accessibility in there. It definitely would off of that sunroom. So the desire would be to have the main entrance be off the porch, but it may need to be off the sunroom for ADA, in which case I'm not sure whether we would move the main entrance to that door as well. That's not my hope, but we still haven't done the interior program, so I'm not sure if we can fit handicapped accessibility once you get into the building, into the rest of the building, without doing some real structural changes.
But if assuming it was either of those, I think, you're saying that this parallel parking space would be the handicapped space?
Yes, yes. Definitely, whatever space is allowed up in that section is going to be the handicap section.
Okay.
And I again, do believe that 2 spaces could parallel park up there, and not both be obstructing the cars in the garage. However, this plan doesn't show that.
And can I just make a point of clarification for my prior comment for Claire's question? So if the parking spaces will be striped, painted, then you have to have at least one accessible space for this particular project, under the 2010 ADA standards. So it's a little fuzzy as to whether or not one is required, but if they stripe, they have to have an ADA space.
The building will definitely meet full ADA
Yeah.
requirements.
And Meredith, just as a question of clarification. So, going back to my earlier question about the stacking, if the permit didn't allow, but human nature or habits led to 3 cars in that driveway, short of us making a permit condition saying, I mean, we're talking about what minimum they required.
Right.
It doesn't translate into you may not park there unless we make that an affirmative condition.
Correct.
Right?
There's nothing for me to go around and do that. That would really be more of like a fire marshal issue in some ways. But yeah,
Well,
there's nothing that says this is about the number of like delineated parking spaces or the minimum number of spaces they have to have. Correct. So yeah, there's nothing in here that says that they can't have extra cars park in there
Right.
if they fit.
If they fit.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not as if we would or permit would somehow become a restriction on that.
No.
It's just what they meet for their minimum.
Yeah, if everybody has minis, they're gonna fit a whole bunch more vehicles in there than if everybody has pickup trucks. Because
Right.
they're just gonna be like, well, I can fit, 3 or 4 in these 2 spots.
Or those that bring their RVs to work.
Yeah. Or their motorcycles.
That's true. I guess going back to the request for the waiver, my preference would be, if you were to grant that you would still consider approving the Terrace Street parking. I'm not giving up on it, but the preliminary cost estimates caused me to look for an alternative.
So you
Right.
get the waiver plus the approval for the
Yeah.
Terrace Street. And
So,
with-
go ahead.
And with the modification from the existing plan, that would allow for more expedited snow removal, or just as presented?
Yeah, as presented, I think the rail would be the rail. It depends on whether it could be detached or not. And my bet is not, because it wouldn't be providing the kind of safeguard that you want on a parking space looking over a retaining wall. So, we have, we hand shovel 2 of our spaces now. On a regular basis, we actually bring somebody in to do that, so that is reasonable to think that we could do that there. There's not a lot of space.
So, I think that's an adequate way to go forward. I think we have to make a decision if we would grant effectively a waiver showing that they've shown 4 spaces within, and if we would be willing, so effectively it would be an alternative, that we would approve the 2 spaces up top, but in the alternative, if those aren't built, we would grant a waiver for 1 of the 5 spaces necessary, on the representation that the space would be found at Department of Labor or another reasonably alternative parking area. So,
Or bike or transit, which are the other
Right.
waiver provisions.
right, I mean, we're not actually saying you must park
Yeah.
a car
Yeah.
at the Department of Labor. But that would be part of our finding as to whether, that was a reasonable. Because if this was on the other side of the State House, having somebody park at the Department of Labor might not be as reasonable. So with that in mind, I think there's a few more areas to cover with these changes. First of all, this is, so you have DeWolf Engineering who designed these upper parking spaces. And they're calling for, it looks as if some change to the grade, as well as this retaining wall installed and this fencing system to stop people from driving over the edge of the retaining wall. What is the stormwater drainage plan?
The grade would likely drain back onto Terrace. It's a negligible amount. Most of the driveways up there, certainly the uphill side, all drain onto to Terrace. There's a storm drain within 50 feet, and it would not be an amount of excess stormwater that would really have any impact on that. Our reluctance to have it graded towards the downslope is I don't want to then take all of Terrace Street stormwater onto the property and create drainage problems on our property. We've actually had that happen at 9 Baldwin before, when the street was redone and we lost our lip, and all of a sudden our parking lot was eroding away, and the city was really great about coming in and fixing that. But my concern about having it run towards the downhill is we'll take a lot more than we're generating off of that little area, and I think that what our space's contribution are to Terrace Street is pretty negligible.
Right. Well, and as well, the concern that it wouldn't shed to the side either onto
Yes,
your
on-
neighboring properties.
Yeah.
So the idea would be to make the grade of these upper parking spaces such that it was above Terrace Street, and it would flow back into Terrace Street, any stormwater runoff, to be handled by the city
Yes.
drains, the stormwater drains.
Just to make sure everybody knows what we're looking at, on the August 19th site plan, if you look at the Terrace Street parking area, you can see the little notation of the 583-foot elevation, and that's the lower right corner when you're looking at it. But that matches up with one of the higher elevations on where that parking area connects to Terrace Street. So they've raised that corner so things will flow back.
And I noticed that Tom McCardle had an opportunity to review this,
Not this one.
not this one?
Yeah, but
Okay.
because we just all got this now.
Okay, so.
Yeah,
he
that was,
reviewed the-
anything updated on the staff report since the last meeting is in green.
Well, he reviewed the one that actually had the 3 parking spaces.
Right, he-
Additional impervious surface on Terrace Street.
Yeah, Kurt was able to review that one. Tom was out until today.
And Kurt didn't raise any concerns
No.
related to stormwater
No.
from that.
Even from the previous one.
Exactly, yeah, great.
Yeah, so this is even better.
Um,
Okay. And then, what would be the circulation plan for anyone parking on those upper 2 spots?
They would have to back out onto Terrace.
No, once they exited the car. Pedestrian
Walk
circulation.
around the block.
Okay, so they would walk
Yeah,
up
we,
Terrace
you
Street.
know, the architect we were working with talked about a stairway down the, I don't see managing that in the winter as being practical.
Right.
And since you have a sidewalk connecting this to the front of the building, people could just walk around the block.
In a similar manner, I would note to one of the nearby properties that also has a sort of rear parking lot, I think up Terrace Street.
Yeah, there's 1 space and then 2 spaces, very similar configuration for, and I forget which Baldwin Avenue property, there's a sign up there, I think it says 7 Baldwin, are up there as well. I will say that the grade isn't quite as steep, it doesn't drop as far down those, so they don't have to have as high a retaining wall as this calls for.
Right. But it's also, for pedestrian purposes, people.
Comparable distance, yeah.
Yeah, right. And they essentially take the same sort of walking path, so.
Yes. I believe in, correct me if I'm wrong, your standard for off-site parking is 1,000 feet?
But this technically isn't off-site.
Oh, that's true.
This is
it's
still
not.
on the same
Okay, you're
parcel.
right.
So that wasn't, the next sort of item would be the fact that we're now approving 2 access points for a lot that's not a corner lot.
Right. So this is a similar issue to what we faced not too long ago with the idea of a second access point, and that requires a finding from us that it would support the second access point. And I'll simply note that the 2 parking spaces are really, would be an overflow parking situation and less of a driveway, more of just simply a pull-in as opposed to the existing driveway, and notwithstanding the fact that this is not a corner lot, it is a lot that touches 2 public streets.
Yeah.
So it's not an unreasonable use to have this double access. Certainly if the lots were divided, you'd have 2 access points if there were 2 separate lots. Any other questions or concerns about that? Okay. So I think that is, so the idea would be, as far as the cars entering and exiting, let's start with the sort of upper 2 lots. They'd pull in and they'd back out. And they'd be relying on the sight lines that they would have up and down Terrace Street.
Yeah,
And-
and there are, there are trees and branches within the right-of-way that partially obstruct the view. They could be cleared off, they're not on this property. In the sight line, if you see the elevations, it climbs up to 590, and that's the last elevation at the intersection of Chapman Road. It continues to climb a little bit beyond that. I paced off about 130 feet until it starts to drop down the other side. There's a crest up on Terrace, and the visibility down Terrace Street to Bailey is all the way to the intersection.
On Baldwin Street, however, there will be backing out as well. Right.
True, yeah, and that's unobstructed to the Capitol.
Right.
The other thing I'll say about that line of sight is on-street parking is only allowed on the other side of Baldwin. That's, sometimes there's backing out of the 9 Bailey space on Baldwin. That's the biggest obstruction, but that won't be the case with this property.
Okay. And then I just simply note for us as a board that, this pullout would not be conforming with the distance from intersections required under B71, because I think it's less than 150, I think it's 150 feet from an intersection. But it is a small neighborhood. Most of the driveways on this street are non-conforming. This is just simply a 2-lot pull-in. Unless the board has any questions or wishes to discuss this further, we can move on. I'll simply note that that would be something we would have to decide to waive in granting this. Let's talk about the retaining wall. And how would, just so I understand, how would the fencing, I understand there's a retaining wall that's required to build up to the grade, to bring especially the front end of it up from its existing topo lines that look like 574 up to the 583. But beyond that, what is the fencing going to look like in this parking area? Is it the white box, and how high, and what is the driving need behind that?
When you say white box, what are you?
Sorry, it looks like a white outline on site plan C1.01, like a U-shaped white outline around the parking spaces.
Yeah, there would be, this is an elevation of it, the other
Okay.
item that I
Yep.
checked on. So this, basically the retaining wall is a precast Lego that fits together, and there's several options for it looking like naturalized stone. And there's several examples of it around town. Probably one example that's pretty big is at the new distillery, the Caledonia Spirits. So there would be, that same product would have precast posts on either end, and the metal black fence would actually slip into the precast post and be set there.
Right. And that would be at the far end, the fence and the posts at the.
Yes. And the side.
Okay, and would it be the same height all around?
Yes.
Okay, and what would the purpose of, I mean, I can understand the fencing on the front, but is there's the same kind of safety concerns on the side?
Yeah, I guess I'd look to see if there's any standard regarding that. I believe our engineer felt as though because there's enough of a drop-off that it would be prudent to have it on 3 sides.
Okay. And, I I mean, obviously, one of the concerns that we had is snow load,
Yeah.
and removal. And understanding that obviously we don't want anyone driving off into the, forward or to the side if there's enough of a difference in height. At the same time, boxing this into a cage, inhibits your snow storage capacity, as well as, there are other ways to stop people from driving off, bollards, smaller pieces in which, or fencing that might give you more flexibility.
I would be glad to explore that.
Okay. Well, I just wonder if there was an overwhelm, if the engineer had indicated, this is something that's standard, that we want, that this is your best option.
I believe his understanding was that the city would expect it.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it might be more of a building inspector
Okay.
issue versus zoning when it comes to the wall.
Right.
At least the safety aspect versus our height maximums.
Right. I mean, the retaining wall appears to be, the testimony, at least as I understand it, is the retaining wall is driven by the topography.
Yes.
The wall has to be so high. I think one of the concerns is that you have this 9-foot high wall, and then you have this fence and post system on top of it that
Yep.
makes it look a little bit like a turret. And I don't have a problem. We're not castle judges, but at the same time, understanding that there is a certain proclivity in the bylaws away from that type of large fencing. Just to understand, if that's a building code issue, I'm not gonna.
Yeah, I wonder if bollards, you could generally do 4 bollards, one in front of each space and one to the side of each, which would be adequate. I would, if that's, if that's engineerable, that would be my preference as well. Although I have to tell you, I feel better about that space once you called it a turret, because we do have, sometimes we're under siege.
We all are. Okay, and I think we've talked about the ADA space. Okay, and then the bike storage. Have you explored where that? I think you were indicating at the last meeting that the bike storage was going to be somewhere inside.
Yes, yeah. So the portion of the building off of the porch, really much of the area between the garage and when you walk into the main part of the building is currently a kitchen, a laundry room, a pantry. It's
I got a chance to walk through the house at
Did you go to
the
the
estate
estate
sale. Yeah.
Okay, so that's all going to be reconfigured, and our office administrator is looking into options for racks and whatnot, but it would be right inside the entryway, and there would be a place to the side where we would probably have space for multiple bikes.
Okay.
I mean, that would be great to be a permit condition, that we do provide off interior bike storage. It's not designed yet,
Right.
but the fortunate thing is we're at the point that if we go forward with this, we're going to there's a lot of options.
Well, I mean, that's one of the, obviously, that's one of the things we're gonna rely upon when we give you if we give you the waiver of the space. And so your representation is that right now, the plans are for there to be internal bike storage space in the kitchen sort of laundry area.
Yes.
So, I mean, that I don't think, well, I'll let the rest of the board speak, but at least one member, I don't think it's necessarily something we have to put into a condition, but we understand that the representation is there will be, secured and sheltered bike storage space based on your representation, that right now it's to be located in the kitchen, the existing kitchen laundry area.
It would be a very reasonable finding.
Right. That's, I think any representation made becomes a permit condition, So I think by representing that there will
Right.
have, provided that it's relevant and it's a finding on which we're basing a conclusion, then if there's a representation that there will be internal bike storage, I think that's sufficient for me. And I believe you also testified last time that you'll have shower facilities for employees.
Yes.
Great. So that's, again, I don't think it needs to be a separate condition, but that's, I think, an important representation if we're gonna grant a waiver down to 4 required parking spaces.
Okay. So, I think those are the major issues that were left on this particular application. Does anyone have any other questions? Is anyone here to be heard on this particular application, other than the applicant? Okay. So, what's the pleasure of the board? And the two options are, we can take this under advisement, or we could hash it out here and now as to whether, obviously, there's gonna need to be a written decision, because there are a couple of moving pieces here. But, I'm happy to take the lead of the rest of the board if you feel comfortable making a motion, or if you'd like to move this to deliberative session at the end.
Well, the advantage to going to deliberative session is simply that we'll have a little better opportunity to make sure we get all the technical details
Okay.
in line. On the other hand, this seems pretty straightforward. So I could go either way with maybe a little bit of a deliberative session.
Yeah. Okay, and I guess I would lean a little bit towards the deliberative session as well, sharing some of those, just as a matter of hashing that out, some of the details. How does the rest of the board feel, though?
Sounds good, that's fine
Okay,
with me.
I'll take that as a motion from Kevin to take this under, close the record, take this under advisement and decide it in deliberative session, and I'll take that as a second from Ryan to said motion. All those in favor, please raise your right hand.
I had a question.
Oh, yes. Do you have a discuss?
I do.
Yes, please.
A clarification on whether the parking area was going to be paved and striped. I wasn't sure if any of these parking spaces, like the first one, was going to be striped or delineated anyway to indicate that that number 1 space as you first come in was going to be a clearly defined parking space. I guess I was just kind of looking at whether they'd be marked in regard to the ADA standard requirement.
It's going to be repaved, and it definitely needs reconstruction, and there's some issues that we need to deal with on a catch basin. I hadn't thought about striping and had not planned on striping. If the board felt as though that should be striped, we would do that.
Well, and I should note, we don't require striping necessarily, and, as we discussed earlier, striping does trigger other requirements such as the ADA space.
So, just for zoning purposes, unless you have, I think it's more than 10 parking spaces, there's no requirement that the spaces actually be striped. I think you could, if you decide that you're gonna have an ADA space, if you just put, your
Sign.
label on the building to mark where they're supposed to be parked, I think that would work. You can talk to
Okay.
Department of Public Works, they have a better understanding of the ADA requirements than I do.
So,
My understanding is that when we get the building permit, that we may need to deal with the ADA parking space.
okay. Any other questions, Claire? Or any other board member? Hearing none, do we all have the motion in mind to take this into deliberative session and close the record? All those in favor, please raise your right hand. All right, we'll take this into deliberative session.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Brian.
Okay, next item of business is 29 College Street. The applicant is Keith Schumacher. Okay. If you will introduce yourselves for the record, please.
Keith Schumacher from Montpelier.
Don Marsh from Liberty Street, Montpelier, and Grenier Engineering.
Okay. If you please raise your right hand, we'll put you under oath. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the evidence and testimony you're about to give for the matter under consideration shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth under pains and penalties of perjury?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. So why don't you give us an overview of the proposed project?
Well, the idea is that we would like to,
You can just move it and point it towards you.
we would like to create two two-bedroom apartments out of the existing property at 29 College Street. And we would like to add a driveway on the Kemp Street side. And the other thing we're asking for tonight is an entry door on the porch.
Okay. So
Can I give just a quick little?
why don't you give an
Summary
overview
here?
as well?
Yeah,
Meredith?
so really the only reason this is here before the board, because this is gonna be a two-family home, so that doesn't require DRB approval usually. This is a corner parcel, so the second driveway wouldn't necessarily require board approval. The main issue is that the second access point
Mhm.
does not meet the minimum spacing requirements.
And by second access point, by
The
minimum spacing.
Kemp Street
Right.
is,
Go ahead.
nope. So it is, I'm trying to remember what the spacing is. Anyway, it's too close to other driveways. There's a driveway directly across the road.
So this is where the minimum spacing requirement is 30 feet, and it's 25 feet from the driveway,
Yes.
according to the application. So
Yes.
that's what we're talking about, is
Yeah.
those 5 feet?
And,
Okay.
because that part has to come before the DRB, the whole application and the entire approval has to come before the
Mhm.
DRB.
Okay.
And I'll note that this has already gone before design review board
Correct.
committee as well.
Yeah.
For the various 7 criteria under that about preservation, harmony, compatibility.
Yeah.
But that was strictly for under their purview, right?
Correct. That was, right, it would have gone before the design review committee, even if it didn't come here,
Mhm.
because of the addition of the second, entry point into the house, so that changed the exterior of the building and added a new door.
Okay.
And then there were some other minor issues, but they didn't really care about the driveway.
Ryan, did you have a question?
No, I was just curious, I was confused by the 25 feet from the existing drive
So,
From
Sorry.
the new driveway.
to
Yes.
the 1-3 Kemp Drive.
no, the 3 Kemp driveway is, I'm just trying to double check my actual numbers here, spacing. So, in this district, an access point is supposed to be 30 feet from any other driveway.
Yep.
It's actually approximately 25 feet from the one directly across the road.
Okay, it's 20,
It's 5 feet too close to the closest other driveway, the new Kemp Street driveway.
but that 25 feet is the width of Kemp,
Right.
okay.
And under the normal standards, Department of Public Works would much rather have 2 driveways directly across from each other than kitty corner to get that extra 5 feet.
The-
Even though zoning has a minimum distance
I see.
requirement, Department of Public Works would rather have these 2 people being able to see each other directly across than trying to merge at a funky angle.
So moving this over 5 feet or shifting how the entrance is not preferred by
Right.
Department of
Department of
Public
Public Works is happy with this, as
Okay.
long as they can get good sight lines by paring back landscaping.
Works. Okay. And what particular pieces of landscaping?
So you can see on the August 7th site plan, there is a note for underbrush to be cleared where there's a little outline.
Yep.
And then there you can see the GMP utility pole in it. So they would be happy with this amount being pushed back and cut away. I am not sure but you can see that some of this is on the neighbor's property. and it's not clear if that's all in the right of way or just on the neighbor's property. So that was an issue that, the applicant needed to try and address.
Well, why don't we start there?
The applicant's more than happy to clear the brush on his property
Yep.
and within the right-of-way. However, the vegetation to the east on the neighbor's property is, some of it's in the right-of-way, so DPW could remove it if they wished. But much of it is outside the right-of-way.
Okay, and I was looking, do we have a picture of what this brush looks like? I mean, are we talking about trees, or are we talking about
They're
shrubs?
shrubs. There are two large maples that show up on the site plan, but the rest are very thin shrubs.
They came out as black and white photos to the beginning of the packet immediately after the application forms. So the second photograph in there is actually somebody's sort of right inside where this driveway would be.
Right.
It's a little hard to see on these copies.
See,
What's,
I don't have it either.
Yeah.
so this, I mean, we're just talking about shrubs
Yes.
and brush. Are these volunteers, or is this a planned landscaping, or is this, you know, when I say volunteers, I mean, it's the scrub that grows up naturally between boundaries because neither side maintains it, as opposed to something that's cultivated and purposely, privacy hedge of some kind.
I would say it comes under the volunteer category. None of them look like they're planted. They're woody shrubs. I mean, they're half-inch, three-quarter-inch diameter.
And so effectively, you have a sense about, obviously, everything that's on your property could be cut down, and then I'm looking at Meredith.
The X. Survey pin is the X, so that's
Okay.
where the end of the right of way is. So this section.
Okay, and has there been any conversation with the neighbors about drawing this back?
I spoke with the neighbor and expressed to her our desire to have some of these shrubs cut, and she expressed to me her desire to not have them cut.
So it's a
So she
situation
said-
without permission?
She said no.
Okay. Go ahead. Yes.
How much distance will there be between the proposed driveway on Kemp Street and that particular neighbor's driveway down the hill a bit?
About 50 or 60 feet.
50 or 60
Yeah,
feet?
it's on the other side, a fair distance on the other side of the house, of their house.
Okay,
So
I understand that,
it's more than 50.
okay. I understand that DPW's recommendation is to trim the shrubs in order to maintain the sight line, but I'm not incredibly familiar with this site, but wonder how necessary.
I mean, this is.
Would it functionally be all right if those were not trimmed? I usually am very ready to defer to Public Works recommendations, but given the spacing, given the low volume of the street, I wonder how essential the shrub trimming on the neighbor's property really is.
Can I just step in for a second? So just a reminder that before the applicant can actually build this driveway, Department of Public Works has to issue a construction and access permit, and they'll be looking at those sight lines again. So this is not the end of that question, whether or not you approve it.
Okay.
Okay.
That's helpful, because we are relying upon both photographs, maps that are somewhat incomplete, as well as our incomplete understanding. And this really is a Department of Public Works issue where the sight lines are something where they can come out and measure, and they're gonna have a better way of judging this. And presumably you can have a more technical conversation with them at that point, as opposed to us.
One of the discussions actually we're considering as a condition of the DPW permit would be that the tenants be asked to back in so that it diminishes the impact of of that sightline. It doesn't end it, but at least you get, ways out before and that's not an unreasonable expectation.
It's not an unreasonable expectation, but I wonder if it's an enforceable one, which is how do we keep people backing in? I mean, that's a nice thing to ask, but
I was considering, and I would absolutely endorse putting a clause in the lease that would ask the tenants to back into their spots.
and to make it a potential default of the lease if they failed to do so on a regular basis,
Yes, we'd work with that.
I just wanted to comment, I live around the corner, very familiar with this site, won't pass it very often, and there's often, this side street is used as a parking area for people visiting the college, so oftentimes there will be cars parked along that side of the road, which I could see may cause difficulty for, having to back into the site. You'll have a car parked, oftentimes there'll be cars parked along here, and like basically all along here.
Mhm.
So I'm not sure if that would be,
Well,
how easy it would be able to be.
winter weather may make backing in extremely difficult as well. Question about Public Works, if they determine that the site distance is not adequate, can they enforce a trimming to make it?
I don't know if they can enforce a trimming on someone who is not the property owner.
It's not in the right of way.
Yeah, and it's not in the right of way. I don't think that they can necessarily do that, when it's, if it's not a public access point.
Mhm.
If we're considering snow and we're considering on-street parking as limitations to ingress and egress from the new driveway, how much of an issue is the shrubbery? If we have these other things that are 8 feet out
Right.
from the side of the road?
Right.
Right.
I think there's more going on here.
I think your question is the right one. I don't think this is a deal breaker, at least from my perspective.
Well, and that's, I was really exploring how far we wanted to go down the idea of putting on a condition like that, because, one, we don't wanna make more work for the zoning department, and two, if we do create work, it should be meaningful as opposed to Sisyphean.
Yeah. Right.
Thank you.
And one that's gonna make a difference, so, okay. Well, any other questions about the particular shrubbery or site distance?
No questions about shrubberies.
We're back to that, are we?
Yes. Just as given, I think that's our primary concern. The other concern, obviously, is that this driveway faces onto another driveway. So while we've heard testimony that the Department of Public Works will favor that configuration, I'd like to understand from the applicant if they foresee any other difficulty, given that these two driveways would essentially face each other as far as any type of traffic or entrance and exit, stacking up when approaching those driveways, or if there's a greater likelihood of any type of accident, given that they'd be both feeding into the exact same point on the road.
The standard design practice would be have driveways opposite each other anyway.
Okay.
We're in an urban area, we're in a low-traffic street. I don't see an issue. The interesting thing is the opposite side is actually a dual driveway, so you have two different residences that would come across. That might complicate it because you'd have theoretically a little bit more traffic than you would. But I don't see it as an issue in terms of safety.
I'd actually, the idea of backing into the driveway, I think it's actually not having that as a condition. It just occurred to me because the logical thing people would do is pull into that driveway across the street and then back across the road and use that, which if I owned that driveway, I don't think I'd be particularly happy about people pulling into my driveway to back across the street. I mean, that would be the sole concern, and what you're saying essentially is that there really isn't any particular design flaw or feature in that, Don. That this is a common practice where driveways will be opposite each other on low volume roads in dense urban areas like this.
And it's consistent throughout the city.
Right.
I don't know where it is, but I believe at the last meeting I saw one part of regulations that suggested that.
Yeah.
In fact, it says it right here in figure 3-12, directly opposite driveways preferred. And so really this is, so if we go back to the idea of separation distance, it's really the fact that this is a small road that's separating this.
Yeah.
But, you know, given that, and is it simply because this road is unusually narrow? Or, you know, I mean, we're talking about, is it, and Rob, I always get this wrong, is it the normal standard width of a road is 2 rod? 3 rod. 3 rod.
49
Thanks.
and a half feet.
49 and a half
Not necessarily
feet.
Montpelier, I think.
Yeah.
That's not a lot, it doesn't apply.
Okay.
It's a historic road in an older neighborhood. It's very
Okay.
much like others.
Public Works is
Yeah.
pretty good handle on all of that. Every street's got it. But
Well, I only ask that because, you know, if I'm getting at, given that this is probably the first time we've really sort of full-on had this particular issue with these particular bylaws, given that they say outright, we prefer driveways directly opposite each other, you know, does it make sense then that the distance between driveway, the 30 feet, they're really talking
I think-
about on the same side of the street?
I think the
Well-
interpretation of the spacing is supposed to be horizontal beside each other on our logical issues of not having, you know, having space. But I think to construe it as opposite is a
It's,
misinterpretation.
yeah, I mean, it specifically says in the regulations that they mean on both sides of the street for those distances. I think it's more of a, they're not necessarily being engineers or people who design streets, getting
People
involved when they, and understanding the design of streets, being involved when they set these particular district-specific standards. You know, and they were picking a lot of those numbers by doing surveys of districts and trying to just find a basic average number for current spacing on a lot of these. And it just doesn't capture everything and make a lot of sense sometimes.
Well, and, you know, this is just to understand, given this, is this a meaningful distinction? If we're going to say, okay, this is fine, it can be less than 30 feet, are we waiving something meaningful that might have collateral consequences, as opposed to what I'm hearing in a mixture of both, Meredith, your understanding of the promulgation of the bylaws, as well as Don, your testimony in regards to the safety features, that this is not a situation where we're likely to be facing some unexpected, you know, issue. All right. Any other questions on the driveway itself? From the board? Given that we do have to take a look at the remainder of the application, because it has come under our purview, I'll just simply note that the Design Review Board, or committee, has approved the aesthetic changes. The only 2 other changes apart from the driveway are the entrance porch and stair, which is gonna be located at the rear corner of the building.
The stair in the rear corner, I think, was already there, isn't it?
That's there.
Oh,
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's
I'm just
existing.
okay,
Yeah, that's
oh,
already
that's
there.
existing, sorry.
Yep, it's just that.
Just this
And then
entrance?
some lights.
Okay. So that's it, apart from the driveway?
We had considered it as an alternative, Mr. Joyce's original plan to add stairs in the back.
Okay.
Between 29 and 31.
Right.
College, and had hoped that
well, that's what I'm looking at. This is the new rear stair, which talks about the rendering of the new steel stairways.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's the one.
I mean, that's what you're proposing to add?
We would like, how would we express that, Don? The idea that we would like to have a second
It's an-
alternative,
Yeah, an option.
an option.
And if I'm reading the diagram correctly, you've illustrated a rendering of a new steel stairway that's going up to 31 College, the Crowley building. And you're saying that you would use a similar steel stairway design to get up to the
No.
second story porch?
No,
on-
no,
that's
this
not
is
made.
this is just to 29 College.
It's
There's
just
a
on-
shared patio.
But what I'm saying, the
That's
stairway would
the-
be up to the shared patio
Yes.
on Crowley. Okay, that was a little hard to, I get
Right,
it now.
right, and that, and the,
This is the property line.
Yeah, and it goes up like this.
Yeah, that's right. It would be,
Oh, so you will share the concrete walkway? Right, okay,
The concrete walkway's on this property,
yeah, yep.
so it would come up on this property
Yep, I see now.
to that.
Yeah, and this is, just to clarify, when we had discussed this, when the subdivision was approved, the board approved the subdivision of 29 and 31 College Street with a privacy fence being built here, and then my understanding is that as part of the purchase and sale agreement, you asked them not to put that privacy fence up here, is that right?
that's right.
Yeah.
So is that a condition of the subdivision?
It was, no, it was just one of the things that they said they were,
it was an option.
it was an option. It was something that could be waived by the buyer.
Okay.
Which he did.
Yeah.
We did.
Okay, so, just so I'm clear, did the design review committee review this proposed metal staircase?
I wasn't at the,
The design review committee reviewed this.
when you, because you were there when you were presenting on the
Yes, they
lights.
did.
Yeah.
Yes, they did.
Okay, no,
Okay.
I was just, because I wasn't there
Oh,
for
you
that
weren't
part.
there.
No, Audra staffed that one. That wasn't me.
They did review it.
And I just didn't see any particular, I mean, they don't usually do findings apart from checking off boxes on the criteria, but I wanted
Yeah.
to make sure, because that obviously has more of an aesthetic impact than it's going to have as what we normally look at for design review purposes. I mean,
Well, the stair that we designed
Development.
was going to kind of blend and comport with the existing architecture. I think there's some language in here about that.
so apart,
Yeah, the stair would just link in to the walkway that's actually shown on the site plan.
right,
So it wouldn't, and since it's an open metal walkway, it's not gonna change the coverage requirements or anything along those
Right.
lines.
right. I just wanted to be clear what we're
Mhm.
reviewing and
Approving.
approving.
Mhm.
And so, there's not necessarily a plan to put in that stairway, you just would like the option as you go forward, or,
We
If
would
I
like
understand.
We would like the option because of the concept of the parking area on Kemp and the idea that the tenant would need to access their apartment. We would like to make it easy for them to do that. And so we think that that would be one way to make it easy. But we don't necessarily know if it would be best, because there's other entrances into the building, but it would come through the basement. And,
yeah,
we don't
well, I'm
necessarily-
looking,
yeah.
I'm looking here, and that's actually where I was going with my next question, which is, right now, as if this driveway was built, I'm looking at one of the pictures that shows the back of the building, and looks like there's a basement door
Yes,
that walks out because it's at ground level. But otherwise, there's no other access to the building from that side of the property, is that correct?
that's right.
So if the basement door wasn't their point of access, they'd have to go around on the sidewalk, which there's sidewalks around this, and they'd walk to the front staircase, go to the front porch, and either go in the two doors depending on where their apartment was.
That's right.
And the existing door is gonna service the second floor apartment, and the new door is gonna service the first floor apartment, is that?
That's right.
right?
That's true.
All right, and so the idea of building the staircase would simply to be a second entrance to the first floor, a sort of back door.
A back door and a way of not having to go in through the cellar or the basement.
Is it possible to get into that back door, if you walk around the property, go up the existing driveway and through that patio? Is there access to that walkway, or does it sit above? Is it,
It's way above the.
yeah, but I can see in the
You
back,
could
but I'm
walk-
wondering in the
You
front.
could walk from the Kemp Avenue side around the building to the College Street
Call it-
side.
if you,
And you could walk in, essentially, walk around the entire building to the other
Right.
side of the building.
Right.
And get into your apartment, if
From-
possible.
from the
Yeah.
back there?
Yes,
Okay.
you could.
I just
Sure.
wanted to make sure I understood that.
Yeah.
So if you came up College Street, up the driveway, you could go in that back door?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right, but you'd have to walk through this landscaped area, right? To get to the back, you're gonna.
Yeah, you would, yes.
Right,
Yes,
so
you
you'd
would.
have to walk through this landscaped shrub area to access the back door with the wooden steps.
Okay.
Yes, what looks like a path on the August seventh drawing is a drip line.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that photograph clarifies it a bit more, that it's actually more of a rain garden, it looks like. So you either have to walk on
is.
the crushed gravel right next to the house, or circle around on the college property. Okay. Excuse me.
So Meredith, if they were seeking approval for the stairway structure that has been reviewed by the design review committee, would they have to, could that be approved administratively, or would they have to come to the DRB to build that stair
But,
structure?
no, this is the,
They've
Because-
this is
proposed.
part
Okay,
of this
'cause-
application, so they can get approval for
Right.
the whole thing. And then if they don't build the stair within the next 2 years, 3 years, if they get an extension, then they have to come back.
Okay, I was under the impression that the application was for the driveway.
Well, the
but not
reason it's
specifically
here
this.
is because of the driveway.
Yes.
But-
So if not for the driveway, this stair would be approved administratively.
Yeah, if not for the driveway, the whole thing would be approved administratively. If there's nothing, once we got the stormwater clarification from DPW, if they signed off on the stormwater and we're okay with the access point, we would have just dealt with it.
And then, I don't think we need to necessarily delve into the particular features of the door that's being proposed.
Unless somebody
because-
has questions about it, DRC's approved it.
Right. And unlike before, where we would sit in review of DRC decisions, we no longer have that direct review. All right, is there anyone in the audience to be heard on this application? If you'll step up to the microphone and please state your name.
My name is Jose Aguayo, and I live at 1 Kemp, which is directly across from the proposed driveway. So our driveway, we have a divided driveway, there's plants, but Dr. Kellogg, my neighbor, and I exit and enter on that side of the street. We don't have a sidewalk on our side. The sidewalk is across the street. That's the sidewalk that everyone uses to get out of the neighborhood when the kids go to school or whatever, that's the side. So my one comment that I wanted to make on this is that it has been mentioned already that that side of the street is used daily by actually staff in the college that park there and other people. And so if you're gonna put a driveway in there, as a neighbor or somebody across the street, I prefer then, if you're gonna approve that, then not to allow parking, because you see, people come up the hill from, there's a lot of cars that turn in and out of there. And a lot of people use the back because of the steepness of College Street. There's actually a little more traffic than you might imagine, because people come around the back with larger vehicles and things like that. So, and the same if they're going down, instead of dropping down, they turn there. And so there is, I mean, I don't know, I don't have a study, but I'm assuming there's more traffic than you might imagine. And there are cyclists too turn there because they rather than drop down, they go around the neighborhood. So if you have cars there in the winter, it gets very, very narrow actually. Which also brings me to the last point that I want to make is, and Keith and I actually discussed, I asked about the snow removal. Because the space is very narrow, the end of the driveway, the proposed driveway, is the new dorms for the college. So unless the snow is going to be removed and taken away, there's really no place to put the snow.
Did you see the most recent plan? So they've shortened the driveway part. So this is all snow storage. I have an extra I can give you. See, the Department of Public Works had that same concern, and so they made them shorten the driveway.
Well,
So that-
the property drops down into the if you go there and see the site, you'll notice that the proposed driveway actually drops in down to the basement of the dorms. So, I mean, unless they're gonna do some major work on that, it's gonna, snow is gonna be making its way. The college actually has their air units and everything right there. So, I mean, I think that that's an issue for them to deal with. What I really am concerned about is to make sure that when it's done, it's safe for everyone. And I know that I have problems sometimes just reversing or even getting out of the property because people park, you know, haphazardly. Sometimes in the winter, the ice builds up, so it gets even narrower there. So, I mean, I would rather see it with no parking on that side of the street, at least heading towards the corner. That way, there's enough width there for even the town's, you know, vehicles and everybody else to turn and be able to see as you come around. You know. So, I know my neighbors have other concerns, you know, but I mean, I think the safety is above all, and the fact that, you know, there's a little bit of traffic on that turns there. So,
Right. Thank you.
That's really it. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'll just note further, if you look at this photograph, and at least the way the driveway is now set to end before the house, it looks like there may be a flat area, but certainly that's something that the college and Mr. Schumacher would have to work out if he was dumping snow that was causing greater water flow onto the college's property, which isn't necessarily under a purview. Let me ask Meredith, when DPW creates a new driveway, do they put any type of no parking on either side of the driveway?
I honestly have no idea. I mean, there's places, there's some distance, but I don't know
Right,
what
I mean,
that
there's a requirement, I
is.
think people stay a certain distance
like a
away.
half car length away from
like
the
5 feet or-
intersection
Yeah,
Yeah, but
Don.
Well, it's not enforced if it is.
No, it's
oh,
not.
yeah, no,
not
I mean,
here.
I mean, you know,
Like, you're
Not
thinking
downtown.
of the yellow curbing or the
I'm thinking
equivalent
yellow
of the
curbing,
yellow
or even
painted
just
curb.
like to the extent that there are parking spaces, I know on where they're delineated, they will often have, you know, they'll end short of the driveway, creating enough space between the driveway and the last parked car to allow for people to come out, in and out safely.
Yeah.
I think that's more in commercial applications where they yellow
Right,
paint the curb to keep people, you know, intersections or major commercial things, but I don't see it on,
yeah. No, I
Residential.
don't see the yellow
See it a lot
either.
on Berry Street,
is there?
yeah.
One last point.
Oh, sure.
It was mentioned, actually, you mentioned it, in fact, this idea of reversing in, I can see, because people already do this, come in there and go into my driveway. I really would prefer not, because it's gonna encourage people to go into my driveway, because that's the only way. If people are gonna be parked in front, they're gonna have to turn into my driveway to reverse in there.
Right.
And I know the doctor and myself do not want that, and we'd have a problem.
Right, I see that as a non-starter for that exact reason, and, 'cause I think that's you know, that's intrusive onto your property, and that's setting it up for that kind of situation. So, you know, that's a good way to start a fight between the neighbors in the city. Okay, any other questions or concerns from the board? So, you know, to a certain extent, I think the issue of parking on the street ultimately becomes a city council issue, and becomes a city, you know, the Department of Public Works, I know they make recommendations as based on safety, traffic counts, you know, as, did we miss something else?
He's just,
If you look at page 6, number 14, large C, little I,
Mm-hmm.
for Kemp Ave, as needed, that must be 1 or 3, right? I don't think that's actually for Kemp.
Adjacent is just down the street.
yeah, I may have,
But there's
I may
no-
have put
there's
in the
nothing
wrong.
on 4. There's no 4.
I just
Kemp.
mean, okay, I just mean the Kemp Avenue adjacent to this property that we're talking about. I may have put in the wrong street number.
Oh, okay, so we're looking at the staff report where it says melting snow is a major stormwater source of concern for DPW, which we've talked about. And
Yeah,
then
that's
the
just a typo.
proposed site plan indicates a swale between the new driveway parking area and the adjacent for Kemp Ave, which would essentially be the neighboring property as needed. But that's really for prevent water runoff.
Yeah,
6 Kemp Ave.
that's all
Yeah.
I'm saying, it's not really 4. It's
Okay.
fine.
Also, we don't plan to do that.
So you're not planning to do the
No,
swale
no
anymore
swale,
at all?
no.
So, and this is, you've
No.
worked some alternatives for the stormwater out with Department of Public Works?
Yes.
Okay. That was the last thing that if,
Ba-
We had decided-
DPW would like we'll have a shallow slope. The driveway, in order to meet the street, is gonna be down approximately 2 feet. So then we'll do a slight grade up to the back lawn and a depression there for snow storage and infiltration, which is their preference. They were not concerned about the fact that the driveway will grade toward Kemp, and the runoff off the driveway itself will come down the north side of Kemp to a catch basin that's about 70 feet down the road.
Okay,
thank you, Don.
that's helpful, so you're not asking for nor are we granting a proposed swale as part of this
Correct.
driveway construction. Okay, so I think that is all. What's the pleasure of the board?
Question of a board member. We understand that there's going to be the curb cut and access permit, and DPW will revisit the sight lines. Would that be the appropriate place to consider the distance between the last parked car and the opening to the driveway? Because I don't feel like I have enough engineering technical knowledge to say, well, you should paint the curb 8 feet of yellow in order to address the concern.
Yeah,
Nor do
it's
we
just-
have the
it's not-
authority to do so.
We don't
And-
have,
Well, no authority either, so never, but I do wonder, in the interest of addressing the neighbor's concern, is that gonna be looked at again?
I
And what might
I
we
don't know the
expect?
DPW ordinance. I can't answer that question.
Okay.
I haven't been here long enough to know the zoning regulations, this current zoning regulations, the 2011 zoning regulations, and the DPW
I just
ordinance.
can't believe it. I can't believe it.
I've learned as
So-
much as I can, as quick as I can.
So-
So as far as directing a next step, would does DPW accept comments on those types of permits? And would that be an avenue for any neighbors to make the same suggestion as they've made here? Just to be heard is what I'm trying to figure out. How do we get this into the conversation?
So my understanding is that, yes, they would take comments, they would take feedback, and, you know, the DPW is driven by, you know, the B-71 standards, the normal engineering, you know, the requirements. They would look at the traffic count on the road. Ultimately, however, any decision to restrict parking is a city council issue that they would have to vote on, but they would get recommendations from the Department of Public Works for such a decision. And the only example I can think of off the top of my head that why I think this, as opposed to knowing it, is if you go up East State Street, about halfway in front of the blue building next to the Vita building, they have a no parking. And I'm not quite sure why that is, but I do remember city council voting on that decision to make it a no parking area. And I can't remember if it was for safety or for some other reason. But I think that's ultimately where this would have to go. You know, we couldn't change the parking even if we decided to, and nor are we charged with necessarily, you know, reviewing the parking situation apart from, you know, any sort of larger sort of nebulous question that we're faced with.
I guess I'm trying to make a distinction between parking zones and what should and shouldn't be parking zones in the city, and zoning and safety or public works standards that may impinge onto a little bit of curb. I feel like there's a gray area there that may or may not actually require city council approval. But in any event, I think my question is answered in terms of how that remark would be shared in the permitting process, would be to speak with DPW. So,
Well,
I guess that's all we can do.
On an informal level too, I think Meredith has heard the concerns not only of the witnesses and applicants, but the board's concerns about this, and would communicate that with DPW, given that her
Yeah.
office is directly across the hall from them. So while it's not a formal recommendation, it certainly does carry, in fact, it may be more effective than a formal recommendation, because it's hard to say no to somebody face to face.
I mean, I
So
will
there's that
note too,
avenue.
just in looking at the picture that's on the front of the staff report, it appears there's a sign, which is typical, for no parking between that sign and the corner. And just judging the distance between, kind of approximating between the proposed driveway and that sign, you know, at most, there's space for one car, kind of, up Kemp towards, College from the proposed driveway. Maybe practically there's not space for one car to legally park there anyway, for what that's worth. Not that it's worth anything, given that don't have any control over this to begin with, but an observation.
An observation. Any other observations?
Full of them, we're full of them.
Okay. What's the board's pleasure? Do we want to take this under advisement into deliberative session, or do we wish to make a motion and decide it here and now? I will just simply say we can easily move this into deliberative session since we're already going into one. But I also don't think that this is a very difficult application either. So I will entertain a motion. And as chair, I can't make it, so that's a Robert's Rules of Order limitation.
Mr. Chair, I would move approval of the request to install a second driveway at 29 College Street that's less than the generally allowed distance from nearby driveways as presented in the application dated 7/11/19 and supporting materials. It
With
looks-
the amendment to the stormwater plans, friendly amendment.
And the amendment to the stormwater plans is not requiring a swale? Is that
Correct.
amendment? Okay, well, that was listed on the plan as needed anyway, so it was not a requirement on the
But-
plan.
Oh, good point.
They're
thank
way,
you.
They're way ahead of us, that's all right, that is all right.
Sorry, Kate.
That's okay. And I think we have I'll stop there. That's the motion.
Okay, so we take,
I still need the cut sheets for the lights.
Oh, said it was for the board's consideration. I didn't know it was a requirement. Okay.
It's
With the condition
options.
that the applicant will please provide the zoning administrator with cut sheets for new external lights as recommended by the design review committee prior to permit issuance.
Yes, if they'd been able to bring them by today, then we wouldn't have had to have it.
Okay.
we have a motion by Kate. Do I have a second?
A second with the, just a question before I formalize that, but with the communication with DPW regarding the parking issues, we don't have anything in the ordinance that specifically guides us in that area, but do we want to say something to the effect that communicating with DPW on the parking issue?
I don't know if that would be a condition. I mean, we can state that we can state in the written decision that this was discussed, so it would be on the record that it was discussed. But I don't think it would be a condition.
That could be adequate from my perspective. And yes, okay, so that's my second.
Okay. Any discussion? The only question I have, Meredith, do we need to enlarge the approval for the
Oh,
design review?
yes, you do.
For the design
Sorry.
review elements as well
well,
as the back staircase?
No, cause that's the, you're right, I'm sorry. Yep,
Shall I modify the
so
motion?
it's, well, yeah, and modify with the design review elements.
Right.
Sure, so I'll give that a try. In addition to granting the request for decreased access spacing, the motion is to also approve the design review committee's recommendation for the door design at the front of the building facing College Street, and also to approve the proposed staircase design as an option between 31 and 29 College Streets as presented in the application. And the lighting, as approved by the design review committee, subject to provision of cut sheets to Meredith.
Okay, so amended motion by Kate. We accept that amended motion. Kevin,
Accepted.
is your second?
Yes.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion, please raise your right hand. All right, we have approval. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, that is the last application of the evening. The other business, electing a chair.
Why do we need to elect a chair?
Because you're supposed to do this on
Once a
an
year.
annual business,
Annually.
this is once a year in August, you're supposed to do this.
Oh.
So somebody needs to make a motion to nominate.
I would like to make the motion to nominate Dan, should you be willing to accept that responsibility for another year. That would be my motion.
I would second that motion.
All those in, any further discussion, observations? All those in favor, please raise your right hand.
Don't vote Dan.
Simply recuse myself. And I think we need to nominate a vice chair.
Is that what we did, or is it that the vice chair is, I think it is elected, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think it's the same schedule.
Sounds staggered.
I mean, it would be an annual thing where you
Yep.
did the chair and vice chair.
We-
Sorry, I
we-
think we just
we
put
did
chair on
it-
here,
we
but
did it
yes,
together
in
last
August.
year.
Okay.
Yep.
If so willing to accept, I would like to nominate Kate as the vice chair for that year.
Think
And
I accept.
I would second that.
Okay, motion by Rob, second by Kevin. Any further discussions? Hearing none, all those in favor of Kate as vice chair? Very good. The only other item of public business remaining is to announce our next meeting, which is Tuesday, September 3rd, 2019. That would be the day after Labor Day. So mark your calendars accordingly.
I will
School will
let
be
the
back
record
in
note
session.
that I will be away that week. So if we have any alternates,
Well, that,
This is
it.
This is it.
do
So-
we have an update as to how the process of getting new board members is going?
Well, so Michael is now a full member and has taken the empty full seat, so we have two alternate vacancies. Oh, no, one alternate vacancy, one full, that's right, you're an alternate still.
So we have one full-time and one alternate
Yeah,
that needs to
open,
be.
and as far as I know, we have no applications for either.
No
Okay,
kidding.
We'll spread the word.
so spread the
Please
word.
beat the bushes.
Anyone out there in TV land who wishes to join the fun in person?
That's right. This is an opportunity, and
Yeah.
I would highly encourage our TV audience to look into this as
Come on
a
down.
rewarding opportunity.
Yeah.
you may get to discuss shrubberies.
Shrubberies is a particularly important part of this job, so, yes.
So welcome, Michael, full-time. I don't think we've acknowledged that yet. Welcome to
You can
the
keep
full
going
board.
with that.
Not that you are a lesser member before,
My
but,
first act, I'll probably also miss September 3rd, so.
okay.
Okay.
That's good to know. Given that we are down, that would, 2, 3,
5.
4, 5. Okay, well, we
So-
still have quorum.
So the next meeting is on the 3rd, right?
Yep,
Okay.
Tuesday the 3rd.
All right, but given that we are 5, if anyone else is thinking that they might not be able to make it, just notify us as soon as possible, so we can make adjustments accordingly. All right, with that, I believe we've already had a motion to move into deliberative session following this, and we'll go off the record. Do we want to make, yes, we'll do that, and then we'll adjourn after the deliberative session.
No, I think we adjourned before.
We close the, we have to
We're closing-
close the public meeting.
Okay, sorry.
I'll make a motion to adjourn the public meeting and move into deliberative session on, the,
11
11
Baldwin.
11 Baldwin application.
Motion by Ryan. Do I have a second?
Second?
Second by Kevin. All those in favor, please raise your right hand.
Abstain.
We are adjourned.